Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Victor Murphy with National Weather Service, Southern Region Headquarters here in Fort Worth. I show 10:29 here, so we'll get started on the webinar in a couple of minutes. We're going to, couple quick housekeeping details. We're going to please ask to hold off on any questions till after. We've got two presenters, Brian Fuchs of the National Drought Mitigation Center and Todd Lindley of the NWS Weather Forecast Office. Brian's going to give us an overview of the drought and impacts, big picture, and Todd's going to speak more specifically about the wildfires in the southern plains and the core drought area. But I would so they'll speak for about a half hour or so total, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So I would ask everyone to please hold off on your questions till after Todd finishes. And let me see here. You can also type in your questions, in the question bar if you want to during the presentation. So I'm going to get started, and I want to I'll hand things off to Elizabeth Waite. Elizabeth is with the NIDIS, National Integrated Drought Information System, and Elizabeth has sort of been the one spearheading these webinars. So I think she has a few quick words she wants to say before we get started. So Elizabeth, go ahead.
Thanks, Victor. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us, and I wanted to give a special thanks to Victor Murphy for really putting this together, for Brian Fuchs for leading the webinar today, and Todd Lindley for presenting on fire issues in the region. Also a special thanks to David Brown with the USDA Southern Plains Climate Hub, and excuse me, Doug Cluck with NOAA's Regional Climate Services Director. And thanks everyone for joining us. We plan to host another webinar depending on the conditions in the region. We plan to host another webinar on May 23. We'll send out additional information on that very soon. And as I said, it depends on the conditions and evolving situation. But if the drought continues, we will have another one of these. So we welcome your feedback. And thanks again to everyone for joining today. Go ahead, Brian.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone for getting on the webinar here this morning. Again, this is the second of the webinar series. The first one that we did was led by state climatologist from Texas, John Nielsen Gammon, and I'm picking up the second webinar here. Just want to recognize all the partners that come together for this. This is definitely a group effort, and we have folks from NOAA and NIDIS, American Association of State Climatologists, USDA, SCIP, National Drought Mitigation Center, where I'm at, as well as many other partners that have come together, not only with information that is being provided here today, but with also recommendations about topics and what we should talk about. So definitely seeing the advantage of people all working together to put this out there. So to start off with, I was sent these photos from I think it's called Vichy, Oklahoma. A picture says 1,000 words, and really looking at some of the destruction of the recent fires in the region. Drought isn't necessarily a signal for wildfire or forest fire, but it can exacerbate the conditions at which they do take place, and we definitely have seen that across the southern plains here. These photos are just dramatic, and I just put them in this morning, and really, you can't really say much more than you really feel for the people that have been impacted, not only with their structural losses, but economic losses associated with this. So here's the logistics. So we're going to have a half-hour webinar. I'm going to go about 20-25 minutes. And then we have Todd Lindley going to follow up and really going to drill into some of the fire information. Again, the team effort of everyone who's come together. The recording will be posted next week. We have a URL for that, and the slides will be available upon request. You can get in touch with Elizabeth at NOAA. And right now, as Elizabeth mentioned, we do have a webinar slated for in May 23rd, and the state climatologist from New Mexico, Dave Dubois, is on deck to lead that one. So stay tuned for more information coming out about that topic as we get further down the road. So here's what I'm going to have for today. Going to have an update on the drought status, really going to hit on some of the climatological and drought indicators that we look at when we are doing weekly assessments of conditions. Going to touch on what CPC has put out for the outlooks through the summer. Those products were just updated last Thursday, so they are pretty fresh yet. Going to speak about some of the agricultural impacts as far as winter wheat and livestock go, and then end with wildfire as we transition over to Todd. So here's the current U.S. Drought Monitor map for the United States. And you can see the reds and browns identify the most intense drought areas in the country. And we can see that from Southern California through the Four Corners region and into the Southern Plains, this definitely has been the area that has been impacted the greatest here in the last 6 to 8 months by drought. And if we zoom into these regions here, you can see that that D4 drought is catching parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and then as you get into the Four Corners regions, Utah and Colorado and Arizona as well. But you can definitely see that through the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles, as well into southwest Kansas and northeast New Mexico, the amount of extreme and exceptional drought is pretty substantial. And when we go back to October, you look at this area here, again, this was the drought monitor from October 3rd of 2017, and we can see that this area is really off the radar. The northern plains is actually the area that was being impacted the greatest by drought. But in October, we were also anticipating a La Nina winter, which meant warmer and drier conditions through the southern tier of states of the United States. And it did verify. The La Nina winter that we saw really dried out these conditions. And for those in the region, you really do remember that September and early October were quite wet in a lot of these areas of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, New Mexico, Colorado. And then the proverbial spigot shut off. And since that time, we've been fairly dry, and that's what really has allowed the conditions to really change and drought to develop in this region. If we look at the change map, and so this is going back to the start of the calendar year, the changes in the U.S. Drought Monitor during this time. And you can see I drew a red delineation line between those areas where we've really had ample to above normal precipitation through eastern Oklahoma, eastern Texas, into Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. And that's where we've seen the drought conditions improve. But you go west of that line, and that's where we've seen drought develop. So since the start of the calendar year, we've seen 3 to 4 class degradation on the U.S. Drought Monitor from January 2nd through April 17th during this time. And it really has been a story of where we've seen drought. Again, look at the northern plains, where that was the most problematic area back in the fall. Pretty much have seen 3 to 4 class improvements down there. During the same time, we've seen that degradation over the southern plains. So over the last 7 days, we actually have seen some precipitation. And in some of these areas, it's been the most precipitation that we have seen for quite some time, even going back to the fall, especially in the areas of the Oklahoma and Texas panhandle. So over the last 7 days, we can see in southwest Kansas, western Oklahoma, northern Texas, anywhere from a ½ inch to 1 inch of precipitation. And as you go further east, we can see those amounts 1 to 2 inches in parts of central Oklahoma, as well as eastern Texas, southern Kansas. When we look at the percent of normal on the right-hand side of the graphic, we can see that this time of year, those rain events can really flip the statistics in a hurry. So when you look at areas of the North Texas Panhandle, West Texas, anywhere from 150 to 300% of normal showing up in those regions, and especially in central Oklahoma. That storm that came through over the weekend was slow moving, had an opportunity to drop some good precipitation, but then you also can see those areas that didn't see anything. And the reds definitely in central Texas, most of New Mexico, most of Colorado, we can really see those areas did miss out and did not receive much relief from this last storm event over the last 4 to 5 days. So going into percent of normal precipitation, I pulled this up through the ACES system from the regional climate centers, and the High Plains Regional Climate Center was good enough to start producing some maps for the Southern Plains region, and they're available on their website now, so you can really get a good zoom into this region. And the area that I highlighted in the white oval, that's going back to the calendar year, percent of normal precipitation, and most everywhere in red is below 50% of normal, and then we see that less than 25% of normal showing up through a lot of the areas where we are seeing the D3 and D4 drought right now. If we go to 6-month percent of normal, so this is going back to the late part of October to present, and we really see that less than 25% of normal area really expand. Pretty much the eastern half of New Mexico, all of the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles, much of southwest Kansas, and even pushing into portions of central Oklahoma. And you can see that 25% of normal quite common as far as what we're seeing in those areas. And then even less than 70% of normal, which is everything in red, quite of an expansive area through much of the Southern Plains at that time, and getting into more of southern and central Texas during that time as well. And if we go back to the water year, so here's the difference of where those wet periods in October drop on or drop off. So here, look at eastern New Mexico, parts of the Panhandle regions, and then when we go back a couple more weeks, we do see the statistics picking up some of those wetter areas that we had in both September and October. But again, I think the story is going back to this period from about mid-October on. It has been really completely dry during that period, and very problematic as far as the impacts that we're starting to see and that have been developing during that time. So again, back to October 1st, you can still see some areas of eastern New Mexico, some spotty areas of the Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle, but the memory of that precipitation has long went out the back door, and we really have been focused on what we've been seeing here over the last 6 months and everything associated with that dryness and the impacts that we're seeing. So just to change it up a little bit and start looking at the standardized precipitation index, and when you start looking at SPIs, you can get a feel for the historical occurrences of these areas. So yes, we did see a lot of dryness, 50 to 25% of normal during that period, but you can really see some of those areas where the SPIs are in that 2.5 to even 2.5 to -3 range, and that's where we're seeing the worst impacts right away. And if we go out to that 6-month time frame, again, pretty widespread, -2 to -2.5, even 2.5 to -3 along the Oklahoma and Texas state boundaries. And you can see why we are seeing the development of drought and the intensification of drought in these regions. But you also can see that in parts of Kansas, parts of New Mexico, and that Four Corners region, there are other areas that are very much primed to see drought development furthering if we don't see any relief during the short term, because conditions are not much different in some of these areas. And if we go to the water year, again, we pick up some of that moisture that was in eastern New Mexico and into Texas and Oklahoma during that time. But we also see many other areas that have been consistently dry going all the way back to the beginning of October, which is generally what we consider the recharge period through much of these areas, not only through snowpack, but also winter and spring precipitation on the plains. And temperatures have also played a part in this. As we've seen to the north, it has been cold. It's been below normal for much of March and April, but that transition line into Colorado and New Mexico and much of Texas, we are seeing areas, especially further to the west, where temperatures are anywhere from 4 to 6 degrees above normal, going back all the way to October. So during the period of time where we had very little moisture from rains or snows, we also have had or above normal precipitation. And the conditions that we're seeing, many, especially on the agricultural side, have said that they were continuing to lose moisture through the soils all through the winter months because of these warmer than normal temperatures, as well as the windy conditions that we've seen. And there was even pictures of irrigated wheat fields that just really were way behind for where they should be, very little green up, and just really being impacted by not only the dryness, but the heat and the wind as well. So going into the outlooks, so we had a pretty good setup for this dryness going back to the fall. And again, we did have a nice system move through that brought some moisture to some, but not everyone. And when you think about April and May and June in the Southern Plains, you think of convective thunderstorm activity, widespread outbreaks of these thunderstorm complexes. We just really haven't seen that this year. And so looking over the next 6 to 10 day outlooks, we have temperature on the left and precipitation on the right. We do have a pretty good opportunity to see those warm temperatures continue, with the above normal chances of above normal temperatures reaching into much of the at least the northern and western regions of the Southern Plains, with the bullseye out on the Great Basin. But that cold air again impacting much of the eastern U.S. And then when we look at precipitation on the right, a fairly good signal through much of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, West Texas, and catching portions of the Oklahoma Panhandle as well, where there is a fairly good signal of above normal chances of above normal precipitation over the next 6 to 10 days, which takes us out through May 2nd with this. And then we look at what the May temperature and precipitation outlooks that came out last Thursday are showing. And again, the temperature signal across the Southern Plains stays fairly strong for above normal chances of above normal temperatures. But then the signal for May is also showing this dry signal through portions of the Four Corners and into Texas and Oklahoma as well, where above normal chances of below normal precipitation. So we'll have to see which product verifies. Again, the monthly outlook may be picking up on some different signals and different models than what we were seeing on the 6 to 10 today products. So really going to have to see what's going to happen and what's going to verify. Now, as we go out further through the summer, so this is taking us out through June, July, and August. Again, that temperature signal, above normal chances of above normal temperatures through much of the western U.S. and into the Southern Plains, and then up along the East Coast as well. Going to have to see how that continues to develop as we get closer to the summer. And then the precipitation, again, that same signal over New Mexico and West Texas, not as great as what we saw in the 6 to 10 day outlook, but at least seeing that we have a signal for potentially above normal chances of above normal precipitation, and even equal chances. If we think about how much precipitation we typically will see during the summer months through the Southern Plains, even normal precipitation during that time would be helpful as far as easing the drought conditions and maybe even reversing some of them as we go forward. And so that takes us to the seasonal drought outlook, and that's really what we're seeing in this product. Again, this takes us out through the end of July. The areas in the gray are showing that drought will remain but improves, and the areas in green are showing removal of drought likely. The areas in brown are showing drought persisting, and then the area of yellow out in the Pacific Northwest about showing drought development. So what we're seeing is that area along the plains of Colorado into the plains areas of New Mexico, panhandle of Texas, panhandle of Oklahoma, and much of Kansas is showing that the drought will remain in some facet, but we do have opportunities for improvement. We're really going to have to see how this verifies, and really it's going to tell the story of where we're going to be at by the end of summer. Are we going to be in a situation where we're going to have a much more widespread area of extreme exceptional drought than what we're showing right now, or are we going to start seeing some of those spring and early summer precipitation events along the plains areas that is going to bring enough relief where we're going to start seeing those drought conditions ease? So looking at the runoff forecast coming from the NRCS, and just looking at the areas in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico where we have these forecast points, and really the probability of a 50% exceedance is way down through this area. Again, we haven't had much snowfall through these areas through the winter months, so runoff is going to again be impacted, and that's going to be indicative of how much water is going to be expected downstream on the Rio Grande and some of the other river basins coming out of New Mexico and Colorado that go to the south. So we'll have to watch that as we go forward. And again, what's left of the snowpack, the snow water equivalent, is right at 0% of normal for this time of year, meaning there's not much snow up in those mountain ranges outside of the upper elevations. So how's this impacted some of the agriculture in the region and some of the livestock production as well? So this product that comes out from USDA and the World Ag Outlook Board, they take the most current U.S. Drought Monitor and they overlay their different cropping regions. So this is for hay, and right now 18% of the hay acreage is within an area experiencing drought, and you can see in the southern plains where those areas are in Colorado and Kansas and New Mexico and Texas. The major hay areas are in the darker green, and the minor hay areas are in the lighter colored green. So we're seeing that as far as impacting the region. As we go forward to cattle areas in drought, we can definitely see that 24% of the cattle areas are within drought right now. And again, those major and minor areas being shown in Kansas and New Mexico, Texas, and Oklahoma right now. So we are seeing an impact to those cattle producing regions, and we've heard a lot about people selling off herds quite early this year, as well as looking for hay and forage on the open market. And then we get into the winter wheat, and we can see that 38% of the winter wheat production is within an area experiencing drought, especially those major wheat areas of western Kansas and the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles, and even getting into central Oklahoma. We can see that some of those major wheat producing areas are being impacted by extreme exceptional drought. And this graphic here shows that well. On the left-hand side, we have it broken down for each state, and I've highlighted Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, where we can see in Kansas that 31% of the winter wheat crop is in extreme drought, where in Oklahoma it's 47%, and in Texas it's 27%. And then when we get to the exceptional drought areas, in Oklahoma and Texas, we see 27% and 17% of those wheat areas are being impacted by exceptional drought right now, which is very problematic. And we see on the right-hand side that we've seen these acres up with an uptick here since about the end of February. So definitely seeing more of the wheat crop being impacted by the extreme and exceptional drought type conditions. And my last slide before we transition over to Todd to talk more about fire, just some quick statistics on some of the fires that we have seen. The McClellan fire in Gray County, Texas, 32,000 acres burned. The Ray fire, 289,000 acres burned. The 34 Complex fire, 62,000 acres burned. Some statistics just for Oklahoma, they've had 992 fires, which have impacted over 680,000 acres. And some of the issues with this have been the impact to livestock. There has been one report coming out of Oklahoma already where 1,000 to 1,100 head of cattle have been lost due to the fires. And again, this is looking at 1 million to 1.5 million loss and production. And this doesn't take into account any of the grazing lands that have been lost due to the fires as well, and having to buy feed on the open market. Again, looking at some photos of a burned out fire truck that was fighting a fire and got overtaken. I want to again mention our partners. I'm going to throw this up quickly as we transition to Todd, who's going to talk more about the fires, but my phone number and email is up here for any of you that want to contact me. And again, please type in any questions in the chat box or save them for after Todd presents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. In the midst here of making Todd the presenter. Todd, I think you need to unmute yourself. I can see your screen there.
All right, thanks, Victor.
And yeah, so you can, when Todd finishes up, you can either ask, like Brian said, either ask questions in the chat box, or else raise your hand, and we'll get to you. I'll unmute you afterwards. You can ask questions directly, or else you can type in your questions in the question screen there in the lower right. Go ahead, Todd. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Victor. Yeah, everyone, hello, good morning. Again, my name is Todd Lindley. I'm the Science and Operations Officer at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Norman. I was a bit of a late addition to the agenda here, so I apologize for the informal nature of the slides I threw together to basically provide maybe a 5-minute briefing here on fire activity that's been occurring on the plains, especially in the last week to 10 days or so. So, of course, other than wildland fire, a big thing in the news and the media here in central Oklahoma lately has been the lack of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. And you can see there a total number of tornadoes so far this year in Oklahoma is 0, and that's a statistic we don't want to throw around lightly, or we're actually afraid to talk about a little bit, because it just takes one tornado to have a disastrous year. So as of April 26th, I believe, we will be at the latest date for the first tornado in the state of Oklahoma. So it's almost a certainty that that record will be broken, and that's a good one. But of course, all of that can change very rapidly. So we're definitely not going to let our guard down. However, Mother Nature's been getting back at us in other ways. Hopefully this is not the new norm across Oklahoma, but these are vortices or fire whorls that have been developing on some of the large wildland fires that we've been seeing in western Oklahoma. So, it's not all good news by any stretch. In fact, these are having tremendous impact across portions of the western parts of Oklahoma and a large part of the southern plains, as Brian spoke about earlier. Now, I want to point out I am by far not the official source on the fire statistics across the plains or their impacts, but due to my research and forecasting wildland fire in the southern plains, I can speak certainly about Oklahoma, which is my area of jurisdiction, and peripherally about other areas of the plains, particularly West Texas, maybe western Kansas, and adjacent areas of the plains. But the latest numbers I got from the Oklahoma Forestry Service this morning, as Brian pointed out, about 992 fires total across the state of Oklahoma for about 680,000 acres. Now, out of that, a subset, about 150, were what we consider Class E or larger fires greater than 300 acres. And those accounts total for 514,645 acres. And I don't think any of these numbers are precise. Please understand, we're still, the fog of war is still pretty thick across the plains, and all the smoke has not yet settled. So a lot of these are likely to change as the season progresses. The Ray fire alone in Dewey County, focused mainly in Dewey County, burned 286,742 acres. That aerial estimate has actually come down about 2,000 acres as of this morning, after some more precise GPS mapping has occurred. And this is just a dated graphic showing the burn area of the Dewey fire in the immediate area of Visay, Taloga, Putnam, Leedy, Sealing in Dewey County. I believe that map is several days old now, but you get an idea of the huge amount of real estate covered by that fire, and a few images from the fire while it was ongoing. So what were some other notable plains fires that we've seen so far across all the way from eastern New Mexico into southeast Colorado and western Oklahoma this season? This is by no means a comprehensive list of the major fires or significant fires in the area, but I just actually quickly this morning grabbed this as a Ghost 16 veggie band image, and I just kind of denoted on here some of the burn scars that I could quickly make out. And really the first fire of the season, if you will, at least a very large fire on the plains, was the state line fire that burned portions of far northeast New Mexico. I believe it burned into southeast Colorado, and about 200 acres or so made it into the far western Oklahoma panhandle near the Black Mesa. And that fire started, I didn't immediately have the date. I believe it was around March 10th, but please do fact check me on that. Don't quote me on it. It burned approximately 23,000 acres in that area. And then a few days later, about a week later, we had the onset of the county line fire, which was northwest of Amarillo. That's an area that's been hit by several fairly large fires this year. The area from Boys Ranch, Channing, really that area between Dalhart and Amarillo was hit particularly hard during the month of March. But the county line fire was a fairly large fire, about 15,000 acres, that initiated on March 15th. We've had a few other major fires, including early April, the 287 fire in Armstrong County that also persisted a couple of days and burned about 15,000 acres. But the fire season really culminated in a series of firestorms or Southern Great Plains wildfire outbreaks that started on or about April 12th, persisted into the 13th, and then again on April 17th. And that's when we saw on April 12th the initiation of the Ray Fire 34 complex, also the Crossroads Northwest, I believe it was renamed to the 206 fire across northern Lee County and moved into parts of Texas. These were all fires that burned approximately 50,000 acres or more. In case of the Ray Fire, much more. And the latest information on the Ray Fire this morning indicates improvement on containment up around 74% or so, and now 94% containment on the 34 complex. Also point out the Carbon and Milleron fires that started in Collingsworth and Wheeler County, Texas, and then moved into Oklahoma. Those burned about 13,000 to 30,000 acres apiece. Also on the 17th, we had the McClellan fire in Gray County, Texas, that burned just over 32,000 acres. I believe Brian mentioned that. And also on the same day, the Badger Hole fire that started in southeast Colorado and moved into far southwest Kansas, that was just under 50,000 acres. Just a snapshot from each of the 3 days where this fire activity really culminated in April 12th to the 17th. What you see here are the best I can approximate in kind of verifying some of our research that we were doing, the location of fires based on satellite imagery. You see here, this is a Ghost 16 geocolor image of these very large smoke plumes coming from southeast New Mexico and western Oklahoma. This was on April the 12th. The parameter that you see in the upper right is a fire weather parameter we use called the red flag threat index, and I just threw that in there for reference so you can see where some of the strongest, most severe fire weather was occurring in association with these fires. Similar graphic for April the 13th. Also see the shortwave IR imagery showing the intense heat signatures associated with fires from western Oklahoma down into parts of West Texas, and the very intense fire weather that was associated in advance of a cold front that was moving southward across the Texas Panhandle on that particular day. And of course, that had a huge impact in the spread of the Ray Fire in northwest Oklahoma. And then again on April the 17th, again, the Ray Fire was very active. We had the onset of the McClellan Fire and the fire in northern Lee County, New Mexico. Also the Badger Hole Fire moving out of southeast Colorado. Again, very widespread, extremely critical fire weather conditions associated with that particular event as well. So through the period of April 12th through 18th, it appears that will be the most active week of the Plains fire season, certainly in Oklahoma. Here at WFO Norman, we send fire notifications when we remotely detect new fire ignitions or changing in the character of burning on existing fires to our state partners at Oklahoma Forestry and the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management. During that 6-day period, we sent 86 notifications. Across the Plains total during that week, The best count that I can get on impacts would include 67 total fires for just over 606,000 acres, 2 fatalities. The reports of injuries are still a little sketchy. Some folks, were injured and treated on site, some transported to hospitals. The most I can confirm is 15, but there are some unconfirmed media reports of upwards of 20 injuries, mainly in western Oklahoma. And I'm not sure if we have full damage assessments completed out in western Oklahoma, but the current confirmation that I can get on total structures destroyed across the plain states during this period would be about 81 structures. Victor, that's all I have, and be willing to take any questions if needed.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Got a couple questions here, which people have typed into the question box here, and let me go ahead and read them here. I guess I'll probably Professor Nielsen Gammons or perhaps Gary McManus would be the best to answer this one. What is the major driver of this drought? Is it La Nina? That's from William Secor. So let me unmute you, John. I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, I unmuted myself.
Yeah.
La Nina is a contributing factor. Historically, when you've got a La Nina, precipitation during the wintertime decreases on average about 20% from normal in that part of the United States. But that's just enough to predispose the region toward drought or to cause decrease the odds of getting significant rain. What we're seeing is record-setting dry conditions over the past 6 months. So La Nina contributed to it, but it was also the way the weather patterns happened to work out that made that part of the United States much drier than the rest of the southern U.S., which is also susceptible to dry conditions during a La Nina.
Okay, thank you, John. See if there's any other questions here. If you have a question, you can raise your hand on the screen. And let me see here if there's any other questions from the group here. Bear with me here. Okay, here's another question. When showing the percentages of cropland affected by drought for the various crops, was that only acres that are dryland cropped, or were some of those acres and subsequent percentages irrigated? So I guess the question is there a breakdown of acres due to non-irrigated versus irrigated?
No, USDA does not present those values as they change. So this is just all acres.
Okay, so it's total acres, both irrigated and non-irrigated?
That's correct, Victor.
Okay. Sounds good. Let me go back to the questions here. What's the best tool that USDA, this might be a Dave Brown question here, what's the best tool that USDA employees can use to report incidents which might be useful to you? And Dave or Brian? The Drought Impact Reporter comes to mind.
Yeah, this is Brian. I think within your state, I know there are coordinated efforts in Oklahoma and in Texas and New Mexico that you have the ability to work directly with those coordinated efforts. And so I would contact the state climatologist in your state. All 3 of those states, they're either leading that effort or quite involved. The other opportunity would be to use the National Drought Mitigation Center's Drought Impact Reporting tool. It's a good mechanism to report drought-related impacts that are taking place and getting them into a national database that in turn will be archived. So there are multiple avenues to get this type of information out into the world, so it can be looked at and assessed as far as the drought monitoring work that goes on.
And this is David Brown. I would echo both of those recommendations and also add, any questions locally, please always feel free to take them to your local USDA service center, and they'll make their way, up the necessary agency chains. But the Drought Impact Reporter and, of course, the state climate offices, definitely two great places to go with on-the-ground information. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, John, here's another question for you. Very good question. Let's see here. What role is climate change playing, if any, in what we're seeing?
Well, the region in general has not seen a significant long-term trend in precipitation. It's projected to see a decrease in precipitation going forward, but there's a bit of spread in the models also. So at this point, I'm personally not attributing the lack of precipitation to climate change. There's just not convincing evidence at this point as I see it. Climate change does, however, obviously contribute to increase in temperatures, which increases the rate of evaporation. And evaporation rates tend to be fairly low in the winter time, but that's an exacerbating factor to the drought, and certainly will affect the ability of the region to recover from drought if the rains resume in the spring as they're forecasted to, because you get a half inch of rain and temperatures are in the 70s and 80s. Most of that water is going to evaporate off the topsoil fairly quickly before sinking in, and the warming temperatures cause that evaporation rate to increase more rapidly. It's challenging to get a handle on exactly the magnitude of that effect, but there was a recent paper that came out focused on what's called the 100th meridian that has showed that if you measure the difference between rainfall and evaporation, at least half of the projected drying trend in that region is tied to the increasing temperatures and greater evaporation rates, with the remainder due to decrease in rainfall.
Yeah, that paper John references, I believe it came out just last week or two ago. I think Professor Seeger, S-E-A-G-E-R, was one of the primary authors of that. Is that correct, John? Or Dr. Seeger?
Yeah, that's right. And I just want to give one caveat, because the press release for the paper said that the boundary between wet and dry conditions has already migrated east by 140 miles. But the paper itself actually says that a better delineation point is 140 miles east of where the 100th meridian is. It doesn't say it's actually moved over that distance historically. It does predict motion in the future, but doesn't demonstrate past movement of that magnitude.
Thank you, John. Okay, here's a question from Sherry. I guess, Todd, perhaps you could answer this, or perhaps one of our USFS folks. I'm not sure we know the answer, but have the fires been weather ignited or human in general? Speaking to the wildfires, do we know the cause of the ignition? Todd, go ahead.
Okay.
I've unmuted you, Todd. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Do we know the cause of the ignition of the fires? I mean,
I've not heard specifically on these. They were not lightning ignitions. We know that. It's generally, in cases like this, it's generally extreme weather that is interacting with routine human activities. Sparks from arcing power lines is quite common. Also, farm and ranch implements, chains dragging on trailers on interstate highways or roadways, blowouts. It really runs the gamut of ignition sources. But specifically on any of the fires, I think I've heard a few from utility lines, but I have not heard any details on any of these.
Yeah, I know utility lines. Sometimes there's been a lot of days. I think the winds, maybe Todd can correct me, I think the winds in general have been much stronger than usual. in this area, which is an area where winds blow quite a bit to begin with. There have been several days of wind gusts in excess of 45 to 50 miles an hour, and that causes power poles or electric lines to sag or spark, etc. Right, Todd?
Yes, you can get the utility lines just to oscillate especially when you get wind gusts. Sustained winds around 35 to 40 and gusts to around 60 to 65. You start seeing those utility lines just start oscillating, and just their oscillating motion and the way they just become in proximity to one another, you start to get arcing, and that's a pretty prolific fire ignition source. On days like this with these very strong winds. Fortunately, it's very anomalous, but when it does happen, it can have very high impacts.
Thank you, Todd. Another question here from William Secor. Good question. I think maybe John can best answer with Gary. How does this drought compare to recent history? Is there an analogous year?
I'm going to turn that one over to Gary. I've been monopolizing the question answers.
I think I got to unmute Gary. Stand by for a second. I think in general, 2011, 2012 was much more longer-term drought, so I don't think that's a good analogy. And so far, this drought's been pretty much confined so far, thankfully, to the drier months of the year. It started, about October 10th or so, and still pretty much ongoing. But the wettest time of the year in this area is basically May through August. So, and of course, 2011, 2012 was worse from a perspective that that drought did in fact persist through the summer months, through those wet summer months. So I would say it has not been as bad as 2011, 2012, at least so far. But as far as just a shorter term flash drought, let me get Gary here so I can unmute Gary.
Hey, Victor, this is Todd. I can make a quick comment about the fires and how they compare to recent years.
Okay, go ahead, Todd. Now, Gary, I've got you unmuted, so you can go ahead and answer after Todd.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. I would just say that, over this period in April from the 12th to the 18th, that, if it does turn out and verify that we burned about almost 607,000 acres, remarkably, as intense as this has been and as devastating as it's been, that's half of what we burned last March 6, 2017 in a 24 to 48 hour period. So, this is not a top 3 fire event for the Southern Plains. It may be close to a top 5, but it's not a top 3.
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay, Victor, I'm going to disagree just a little bit. It does, to me, resemble a little bit the beginning of the drought of 2011, 2012. Of course, I always say the drought of 2010 through 2015. It sort of mirrors almost exactly the starting point of that 2010-15 drought, starting almost exactly October 1st. Now, this one, you might say October 10th, but since then, until this weekend, we had very low rainfall across the northwestern half of Oklahoma and then through the high plains. Now, the trouble is, though, when you talk about the 2010, 2012, 2011, 2012, 2010, 2015, whatever you want to call it, is that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So I'm certainly not saying that we're headed for another drought of the magnitude that we saw back at the beginning of this decade. But to me, it does sort of resemble the beginnings of the 2010 to 2015 drought. One of the differences, though, in April that we see compared to the one back in 2011 is that April was extremely warm back in 2011. We already started really transitioning to summer by this point. And this April, of course, we've been much below normal, possibly headed for the coolest April on record for Oklahoma at least, and for probably some of the surrounding parts. So that's one of the big differences. We haven't had the massive increase in evaporation, but on the other hand, we haven't seen a massive increase in greening up due to the lower temperatures. We've had several freeze events. So it's a very complicated picture. It's always difficult to pick out analog years, but still, you look back at that October through April 2010-11 period, and it is quite similar.
Yeah, it's a good point, Gary. It's easy to disagree with me, and you're right. The October, the 2010 drought, or 2010, through 2012 or so drought, did indeed begin in October of that year. I think after the passage of Tropical Storm Hermine across Texas, but of course that one persisted right on through the summertime. We had the monster summer of 2011. So far, it's tracking pretty good, but you're right. If it continues through the summer, then it'll be 2010, 2011 will be a good analog. But so far, we haven't quite seen the severity that we saw in 2010 and 2011. Due to the fact
each drought has the chance to end up looking like other droughts, but of course, with every intervening rainfall event, it looks less and less like the beginning of that drought back in the early parts of this decade.
Right. 2011 ended up being, I believe, for the warmest month. You can correct me, Gary. The warmest month ever recorded for a state in the United States. Correct? Oklahoma, was it July or August 2011?
Yeah, I think July. Oklahoma was the warmest month ever recorded, and of course, the summer of 2011. Texas and Oklahoma tied for the warmest summer on record, at least dating back to 1895 for any of the states on record. So again, that's into the future. We have no idea what's exactly going to happen. So just strictly stating what's happened thus far. And again, we didn't get a lot of good rainfall events in April across western Oklahoma and the High Plains. Back in 2011 either, so that's a little bit of a difference. We've already gotten a good rainfall here in April of 2018, and also again very cool this time around.
Right. So once again, with May through August being the wettest time of the year across much of this area, if they get their normal rainfall during that time period, impact should not be as significant. If not, then we could, 2011 may come to fruition. Another question here. I think, Gary, I'll keep you unmuted. You're on a roll. Good question here from Bryce Anderson. What about recharging groundwater? How about groundwater recharge? Perhaps USDA folks can answer that.
Right. One of the worries after each drought, of course, especially a long-term drought, is that ground gets baked hard. And it's more difficult to get some percolation down into the soils. But the nature of the rainfall event we saw this weekend was more of a long-term moderate rainfall, not the big heavy downpours that we see often with convective precipitation during the springtime. So we've always said that eliminating drought is a process. The soils need to drink first. Get those soils saturated, and then the intervening precipitation events, you can start to get the runoff into the reservoirs and the farm ponds, which of course have been a very one of the worst impacts we've seen through this drought is the reduction of the water for cattle across western Oklahoma and the rest of the High Plains. So, but of course it doesn't have to happen that way. If you get a really heavy rainfall, then you possibly get the runoff first, and then maybe the intervening rainfall periods start to percolate down in the soil. But with the nature of the previous rains that we've had over the weekend, we will, as we look at the impacts a little bit closer, I'm sure we're going to see some soil moisture recharge, at least to some degree, across those areas that receive the best rainfall.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to go ahead and go to the floor here with some questions from folks that have populated their question pane. I'll start off with Bryce Anderson. Bryce, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. I think you still have an unanswered question or questions.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm a little concerned about how the irrigation situation is going to be, considering how dry it is in the Rio Grande Valley especially, and the fact that snow water equivalent has been so poor this past winter. Any thoughts on that, please?
Hey, Bryce, I'll go ahead and take a stab at that, and then maybe perhaps others can chime in. New Mexico, it's interesting. The northern part of the state has probably been ground zero for the drought with regard to lack of precipitation in general, whether it be rainfall or snowfall. I think the snowpack or the snowfall, snow water equivalent is probably among the driest or lowest on record. So from that perspective, it sounds pretty dire. But having said that, the preceding summer of 2017, the summer monsoon, July through September, even the first week of October, was quite prodigious. So the reservoirs in New Mexico, by their standards, are actually doing pretty good. They're not that bad off. I can send you, Bryce, I'll send you offline, I'll send you a reservoir chart for New Mexico. And so the water storage, the reservoir situation is not that bad right now, thanks to the prodigious summer monsoon precip of the summer of 2017. That's what makes this, like Gary was saying, all droughts are very unique. The abundant rainfall for New Mexico in the monsoon of 17 was fortuitous in light of the fact that the rainfall literally stopped on a dime about the first week or two of October of this year. So if I answer your question, I think stream flows are not that bad yet either. They're should be starting to go downhill pretty quickly due to the lack of snowpack or snowfall, but we'll have to see that. There's still time to save that, if the normal rainfall does return.
Okay, that takes care of the reservoirs in the Rio Grande. What about groundwater, southwest Kansas into the Oklahoma, Texas panhandles?
I'll defer to perhaps Gary or the USDA folks on that. Or else we'll have to get back to you, Bryce.
Okay, thank you.
How about that? We'll have to get back to you on that one. Okay, some more folks with questions. May have answered these. If not, Christine Newton. Christine, you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
No, I think that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, Donna. Donna Wyrich, do you have a question? Okay. Donna, if you're still on, do you have a question at all? Okay, nothing heard. Dennis Toddy, question? Okay, may work my way down the question screen here. Hopefully we answer these in the chat. If not, make sure everyone's questions answered. Kelly Pistol?
Yeah, hey, the question I had, we had a situation last week at Alva where the temperature started out like at somewhere 33, 36 degrees and then climbed to 99 by the end of the day. How much influence would these a series of wildfires have on the populations there near them? I mean, can they essentially act in concert and influence in some level what's going on around them, or is or is something like that just a regular Oklahoma anomaly?
This is Gary McManus. Sorry, Victor, I didn't mean to take charge there. I think the large diurnal temperature swing that we saw in Alba that day, I believe it was 33 to 101 actually. I can't remember exactly. A 68 degree diurnal temperature range. That's indicative of just how dry it is. Of course, during the night, the very dry air, cool air mass, temperature drops very rapidly. We get down to 33, have frost in some areas, and then we get the strong southerly winds that are associated with the high fire danger. And again, the extremely low humidity, and so then you have the intense heating. It was one of several locations that had the similar diurnal temperature range, just comparing the low versus the high that day. And it's sort of indicative of desert air, and that's the type of conditions we were seeing across western Oklahoma during that time period were very, unfortunately, desert-like. So sort of an uncomplicated answer to a more complicated question, I guess.
Thanks.
Yeah, Kelly, very desert-like. Gary, I think the low is 33 and 34, and the high was actually, I believe, 102. So a 68 or 69 degree diurnal temperature spread, which is desert-like, is probably an understatement. Okay, Lloyd Colston, I think you had some questions. Let me see if I can. You're self-muted. If you want to unmute yourself, I can get you on the dance floor here as far as asking your question goes. Okay, I think we may have answered Lloyd's question. Mark Schaefer, I believe you had a question. Mark, if you're on the call, do you have a question at all? Okay, I'll leave you unmuted, Mark, in case you get back. And Naloon Fernando from Texas Water Development Board. Naloon, do you have a question? Thank you for your patience, by the way. Naloon, do you have a question?
No, I do not, Victor. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think that pretty much does it. Sabrina Shankman, let me go to unmute you. Sabrina, go ahead.
Oh, no, I don't have a question. Sorry.
No question, okay. And William, did we answer your question, William? I think we did. Do you have any kind of a follow-up at all?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I think that pretty much does it as far as questions go. So anything we did not answer, feel free to send me an email. Share my email address. I'll, if I can answer, I'll get it to the right expert to answer for you. Bryce, we obviously owe you a follow-up question with regard to the reservoirs and perhaps groundwater situation in the area. And so with that, I want to send it back to Elizabeth to see if she, we'll have our next webinar on May 23rd. Go ahead, you can count on that. We did type up a quick survey. I would ask you all to maybe, if you get a chance, after the webinar, when you get the survey questionnaire from us, please take the time to fill it out and let us know how we can improve this or make it better. And Elizabeth, I'll go ahead and give it back to you for the sign-off.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks to everyone as panelists. Really appreciate it. Some great information was shared today. Really, really useful, I think, and very timely. And thanks, everyone, for joining this webinar. As Victor said, please provide your feedback. We do want to make sure that these webinars meet your needs for information and timeliness of information provided. So we can only do that if you give us your feedback. So that's very much appreciated. And we look forward to hearing from you and look forward to the next webinar in May. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Yeah, and I do want to say once again, I'm sorry that we will have the webinar will be available, on the drought.gov website for you to access, after the fact. And hopefully by a couple 3 days or so, we'll have it up on the drought.gov website for you to access or for you to share with anyone else, in your sphere. And,
thank you, Victor. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah. And so thank you everyone for attending. And like I said, feel free if we did not answer your question or get your question, feel free to drop me an email, via my email address, which is victor.murphy@noaa.gov. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful
Thanks.
day.
Bye.